And welcome back to the Livingston Parish News Weekly Show, a podcast brought to you by the Livingston Parish News. My name is McHugh David, publisher and editor of the news, and I am joined today by a man who has risen through Livingston Parish government and ended up at state government in his second year. We're going to talk all about it today. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning, McHugh. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Buddy Mincey Jr. I'm State Representative, District 71, which includes the Denham Springs area and most of the city limits, all the city limits of Walker.
Okay. And so a pretty hefty chunk of Livingston Parish in terms of population.
Yep.
As the mayor says, his 7.5 square miles here in Denham, and I believe it's 8 and change in Walker. A lot of people don't know Walker city limits extend pretty far east into that industrial district, so they've got a lot of land too. So today, talking about your second session, a little different than your first, I would imagine. For those of you who don't know, Mr. Mincey was elected in the fall of 2019, had his first session in 2020, right in the middle of COVID. First, before we get into your bills and some of the things that happened this session, kind of want to get your feeling on what was the difference between last year and this year.
So of course the first year there was a lot of pageantry and a new freshman class coming in, and we starting a new term for all of us, and that was quickly dissipated because of the COVID. And we're out for weeks, and we come back and we still maintain our workload and we get our bills passed on the House side. So it was very fast paced. From that perspective, it was the same this last session. As a fiscal session, we had a tremendous amount of workload, and it was fast paced and information overload throughout the whole thing. The last year, the first session, our mandate was tort reform. And this year mandate was tax reform, and we've met both of them.
So when you're talking about these things from, a mandate standpoint, how does that come to be? Like how, is that sort of the governor and House and Senate leadership kind of agree? Or is that more of just House and Senate saying this is what we're going to get done this year, and the governor's like, okay, great.
Well, I think both of them, as far as a mandate, I think it would probably be pretty consistent from us, from our constituents. The people wanted both of those. And, of course, when we deal with our mandates, we deal with our House leadership. And so, from their perspective, they had the same priorities that we had. Our Speaker of the House he represents the southern part of Livingston Parish. He joins me. And his interests are pretty much about the same as mine as far as those issues.
Tell us a little bit, and this is right before we jump into the bills. I want to ask you, did your confidence at the desk change from year one to year two?
Absolutely. I mean, look, you can't, and I've said this before, you can prepare all you want, but you have no idea what it is to be a legislator until you are in those aisles on that House floor. And the first session, I think, or our first year, we were baptized by fire, and I think after a special session and two extra sessions, two special sessions, we've been seasoned pretty good. So but my confidence with going through 3 seasons, and also just getting to know how everything works, the process, the dynamics, the logistics, even makes it much better as you go.
Sure. So when you're talking about being a legislator, and like you said, a little bit of trial by fire in your first year, I find it interesting what you said about there being some pageantry that was immediately taken away. That could have wasted a lot of time. So that's very interesting. But when you're talking about being a legislator, especially a representative, it's a packed house. And sorry about the pun for the house, but it's a packed house. So you and I spoke after your legislative session last year, spoke before this one. Tell us about some of the things that, you've kind of learned along the way before we get into the bills that you filed.
Yeah. So look, being a state representative is all about relationships. It's all about the relationships you have with your colleagues, our administration, our leadership, lobbyists, the industry groups. And it's all about being able to, for me, to establish yourself as someone who's with integrity, and someone who will listen, and someone who is open. And I think I've tried to display all of those.
Okay. And, you know, actually, I keep thinking of things. You always have a script, and the script never quite works, but it's good to have a plan. When you're talking about that, being open, being willing to work with people, and kind of being a mediator, I want to bring up real quick part of tax reform was a change to the sales tax system. Wasn't quite as extreme as was originally proposed, but you were part of making sure that the changes that were made worked the best, especially for a parish like ours, which has a great sales tax collection system through the school board and Mike Curtis. Give us just a brief overview of that. If for those of you out there, they call it centralized sales tax. It didn't quite go that far, I don't think. It was more of a compromise between parties. So, kind of give us 2 minutes of your involvement on that one.
Yeah, so the centralized sales tax, what we ended up with in HB 199 is much different from what it started off with. And I think that difference is all that collaboration and cooperation between, our state government, our industries, the business and industries, and also our local government. And so, it started off as centralized. I was probably very reluctant about that. But what it evolved into after months and months of cooperation and working together was a streamline. And at the end of the day, I think that's better for the state, and I supported it.
Gotcha. And I know that you were very much involved in making sure that you knew that there was some state push for it, but you also wanted to make sure that your folks out here had input, especially those who were reliant on it.
Yeah, in the past, when centralized sales, this is not anything that's new. It's come up before. I think is the way it's happened is that these things evolve, and then we first time our local governments, our school boards, our municipalities, police juries, and your sheriff's association, the first time they really get involved with it is as it goes to committee, and then usually with not having involvement in it, there's some resistance, and I really emphasize the trying to get those locals involved up front. And I think we did that, and and it worked out. It's the way the system should work. You should have all stakeholders working together. They all have different perspectives, but working together to try to find common ground. And we were able to do that with HB 199.
So let's move into your individual bills.
Okay.
The things that you were, I guess you can say, that you jumped into with both feet. You had a local bill on the docket this year with regard to the tourism board, and I believe that went through.
Yeah, no issues with that. It went through pretty easy. It was the right thing to do. We only have, we have 9 councilmen, only 7 of them have appointments to our tourism board, and it's the right thing to make every one of them have an appointment, so the parish is well represented.
Sure, and I mean, 2 of the people that did not have nominations to the board had some of the largest. Gary Frog Talbert has Rec 2 as well as Tiki Tubing with no appointment to the board. I believe the other was Scooter Keene.
Yeah.
And of course, he's a partial representative of North Park. So good to see that went through unabated.
If I may just add something to that, though, in all fairness to our tourism board, even though they didn't have representation, I think they have been represented throughout the parish. I think, sure. Our tourism board is promoting the entire parish. So I don't think anyone was ever excluded. This just gives them a voice.
Sure. And one of the things, if I may, that I heard from both of those gentlemen is not necessarily that they felt underrepresented. It's just the parish is growing. There's a lot going on. It was good to have a voice at the table to say, hey, we have this going on as well.
Absolutely.
So the next one kind of, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, there were sort of 2 that went together with regard to schools, but one of them we're talking about vaping and a sort of a legal precedent set for age requirements and things like that. So first and foremost, want you to give us an overview. But there's also an interesting story here because you had 2 assistant principals from Denham Springs High School come testify. So we'll ask about that in a second. Love to hear about that experience. But first, tell us a little bit about the bill and kind of what pushed you to present it.
So Assistant Principal John Easterly with Denham Springs High School contacted me and said, buddy, I have an issue I need your help with. He says, vaping is so rampant in our schools and it's in our junior highs and our elementaries. I would like for you to pass a bill to increase the vaping age to 21. My initial thoughts were, man, that sounds great, but I don't, we were limited to 5 bills during the session. I didn't want it to take up one of my bills. And I didn't quite honestly want to fight with all the industry groups that I expected would be against it. And so I said, look, go do some study, go do a survey of your students and come back and tell me how big an issue you have. And, they partnered with Ascension Parish and they got, I think, 2,000 respondents from an anonymous survey. And the results were just staggering. I think it was 46% of our kids were vaping. When you asked the ones that vaped, how many times do you vape a day? And it was, the biggest response was over 100 times a day. And, whenever they showed me the increase in discipline, and how we're having discipline issues even in our elementary schools, it became something that was a priority for me. And I thought it was something that was worthwhile taking on, and we did.
And I believe it passed, correct?
Yeah, it did. So 2 years ago, this went to the House and it got beat handedly. I mean, I think they may have got 20 people vote for it, 23 or so. And so the resistance I expected was there. So I reached out to, legislators that were there at the time, and industry groups, and I found out who all the stakeholders were, who were opposed, and some of them were surprising. And I reached out to all of them in the development of the bill and made them a part of the discussions. I made them a part of what I was trying to do. And we increased the age to 21. There's a federal mandate that requires us to do that within 2 more years or we lose some block grant money. So, it made sense for us to do it now. And whenever I presented that to the House and to the Senate, they supported it, with very little resistance, very little objection to it. But, it's definitely a health issue for our kids.
Now, I believe it was in House committee, but Mr. Easterly and Mr. Wax came to testify, correct?
Yes.
How was are they the first to come testify on behalf? I imagine there weren't a whole lot of testimony last year for bills, but this year, are they the first?
I don't know if they were the first, but they were the first for me, and
Right.
And it was, they were so engaged in the process and involved in the process. I mean, this bill came to me through them. I wanted them beside me when we started talking about the bill. If legislators had issues supporting this previously, because of the industry groups or whatever it may have been, I wanted them to see firsthand the effects it's having on our kids. And those two legislators, Assistant Principal John Easterly and Justin Wax, came up there and just gave their perspective from their view, and it was very well received. And I appreciate those guys for what they do every day at our schools. But I took them to the House and I also took them to the Senate, and their involvement was critical.
So that got passed, but I don't know if it's a sub part of a bill, if it's a separate bill, but there is an education portion of it, correct?
Yeah. So a lot of people argue that, look, this isn't going to fix the vaping problem, and I totally agree. But it was the first step.
Sure.
There's I think it's called social something, where they are out. You got people who are going out and purchasing these vaping products in bulk, and they come back and they sell it to the kids. And so that it's obviously an issue that needed to be addressed.
Okay. So and as you said, you've taken the first step.
Yeah. So first step, and there's an education component of it. Right now we have substance abuse training for alcohol, drugs, that type of thing. So we just incorporated the vaping products into that. And I suspect there's going to be more steps to take to really address that issue. But I'm proud that I was a part of the first two.
So staying with schools and education, I know that we had discussed back in the spring or early spring. I think it was actually still very cold.
Mm-hmm.
When
it was.
I think the freeze had just occurred.
It
when
was.
You and just in case people don't understand I guess you can describe the legislative session as both a marathon and a sprint, especially if you have bills that require certain oomph. There's a lot of sprinting in the middle of it. But please remember, these guys go up there for a long time. A lot of meetings, a lot of deliberation. It's hefty. But staying with schools, a teacher task force
Mm-hmm.
was something that, especially with your school board background, you had been interested in. So walk us through that.
Yes, as a school board member and just a member of the community, I've seen the decline in our teacher workforce. I've seen, we used to have job fairs in Livingston Parish where we had 10 applicants and 500 people, 10 positions and 500 people show up. And we don't even have job fairs anymore. I've been to Southeastern graduations over the years, and the education department used to be the vast majority of the kids that were graduating. A huge number, and that's probably a third of that right now. And I've seen, I've talked to administrators. I know how it's difficult for them to find good qualified teachers. And, in the community, I've heard, teachers that I know who have kids, when their kids get ready to go to college, they're like, don't be an educator. This is not what we signed up for. So I know it's an issue. I think we have a statewide workforce issue with our teachers. It's something that needs to be addressed, and we need to identify what those reasons are and to try to find solutions to them. It's not just about pay. This task force is about recovery, retention, and recruitment of teachers. And it's something that I spent a lot of energy in, a lot of time. There's a lot of stakeholders with it. And, working with the Board of Regents and Louisiana School Board Association, we put together a really good task force that I think is going to pay some dividends for our teachers.
Okay. And that is interesting, like you said, coming from your school board background, because school system here is the largest employer. Not even close. It's not even close. I know somebody actually argued that with me the other day, and I said, okay, sure. Several thousand employees and 46 school sites, just a lot going on. But of course, what you just brought up, you have to think to the future. Now is good, tomorrow can be better, but we got to move in that direction. So,
yeah, if I may just say, I think we actually, last numbers I saw at McHugh was about 3,500. So, it is definitely the largest employer of the parish. But not only that, but our school system is the economic engine of our parish. It has been for so long. You ask people, 5 years back, 10 years, 15, 20, why did you move here? And I think the majority of them are going to tell you they moved here because of our school system. And, as a parish, we expect excellence. I think one of our motto is education, excellence in education. And we demand that, and we need to do everything we can to protect that.
Staying with that for a second, I do want to bring up again, people might remember that performance scores last year were tossed because of COVID, and that was a national thing. This year, I know that you have you had a late bill on school and district performance scores.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't had as much time to read that as I would like. But I'd like to hear from your perspective on that and why you proposed it.
Yeah, in the past, you take us 2016, we waived our school performance scores and our district performance scores, and we should. And there's a precedent for us to do that during emergencies where we're disruptive. And how more disruptive can you be than what we had last year? COVID was one thing, but how many storms did we have? And then we had an ice storm. So it was a tremendous struggle for our parents, for our teachers, and for our schools. And to hold them accountable for that school year and give them a letter grade, I just don't think we should be doing that. We haven't done that in the past. I think in the nation, all but 9, last count I had, all but 9 states in the nation had asked for this waiver through the federal government, and they've all received it. I think the case is there for us to receive this. Again, being short of bills, I met with the superintendent ahead of time, and I had a good feeling that we would probably end up with this. I didn't pass legislation to do it because I was limited. But as time, progressed and nothing was done yet, I passed, myself and Senator Pope passed a resolution to urge the superintendent to get those waivers. And I don't think we've received them yet. I'm still hopeful that he comes through and he, takes that accountability off of our kids and our teachers. We still tested them. We are still going to know where our kids performed, and we'll be able to adjust accordingly. But to give our schools and districts a letter grade with everything that they went through last year, I just don't think that's what we should be doing.
And I can understand that. There were still struggles, especially at the beginning of this year. A lot of kids started off on a tough foot or maybe a difficult foot. So, grading for the whole year, especially when you start off poorly, it's a bit tough. It's a tough sell. Moving into a totally different subject, want to talk about, you had 2 bills that kind of went with drainage.
Mm-hmm.
One was the Amite River Basin study, which we'll talk about, and then the other was it was a subject that had kind of fallen out of the limelight for a little while, I was glad to see you bring some attention to it, and that was the I-12 wall. So let's talk about your Amite River Basin proposal first.
So look, I've lived here all my life, and I remember the flood of '83 very well. I remember, the actions that we took. The Amite River Basin Commission was formed. We've passed some taxes to help, for the COVID diversion. But if you look around and look at not a whole lot's been done, and that was real concerning for me. Initially, I had set this bill. The Louisiana Watershed Initiative gives us regions, and we have 8 regions in the state. And our basin is the only one that's set statutorily in a flood basin in the state statutes. And I think arguably, if you look at, I think in 38 years, we have reached flood stage 31 times. I think arguably our basin, if you look at the Amite River, look at the Grace Creek, all that water flow that comes through, we should have our own region. So I actually, one of my 5 bills was going to go and form another region just for the Amite River Basin. But when I got with staff and had them look at it, I found out I couldn't do that. The LWI exists just by executive order. There's no statutes that exist that set up that program. So I had a choice of either setting up that program or doing something else. So I started talking to other folks, went out to CPRA, and asked them for their assistance and working in that direction. And it evolved into a situation where they were willing to study our basin and come back with some assessments and some suggestions. And so we passed a resolution to do that.
Okay. Let's talk about the other thing, which is that I-12 Barrier Wall. I know that there was or is a lawsuit. It's hurry up and wait is what that really amounts to. But you passed something, I believe it's a resolution during the session. Tell us what your intent was with that.
Another bill that I was going to pass was, I was going to pass legislation to make DOTD fix it. And I actually met with Secretary Sean Wilson, and I said, hey, here's the options I see. You got option A, B, or C to fix this interstate. I'm going to give you the choice. Which one do you want? But I'm going to try to pass legislation to do that. And, and he, expressed to me and pleaded with me and said, buddy, don't do that. And I'm like, well, why not? And he's like, well, we don't know what the solution is. So, after 5.5 years later, that's extremely disappointing for me. And so, I said, all right, well, what can we do? Let's find out what that solution would be. Let's find out what it's going to cost. Let's find out, how long it would take, and see if it's something that's doable. The lawsuit is really complicated, this whole thing. But, we were able to convince DOTD to work with us, and we passed that resolution to find a solution. And, a lot of people say, well, we study enough, and, but look, these things, there's costs associated with all this. And, when you go through and you do something to an existing structure, you compromise the structural integrity, then any liability from a crash that results from it is going to be on the state. It's going to be on DOTD. So, we are obligated to find, not just do something, we're obligated to do the right thing. And so this resolution is going to push that direction. And, it's another one that was a struggle, initially, speaking with DOTD about it, because of the lawsuit. They didn't think they were the right people to be doing it. They didn't want to compromise themselves in a suit. So, I reached out to CPRA and we tried to work through that. It ended up coming back to DOTD needed to do it. And they're the right ones to do it. So, Secretary Wilson has done a phenomenal job of working with me on this issue. He's committed to trying to find this. I've spoken to the governor about it. I've spoken to my colleagues in this basin. But it's kind of that wall is kind of fallen off the forefront for those who wasn't drastically affected by it.
Right.
And campaigning and talking to those folks, and and it was something that I've been committed to all along. So I'm looking forward to the results of that study.
I wanted to ask, and this is one of those questions I said I was going to work in. It's very interesting when the way you propose how you go through formulating a bill. It sounds like you're very much a collaborative effort kind of guy.
Absolutely.
I wanted to ask, from a sort of a specific standpoint to you, whenever you are thinking about bringing a bill, have an idea of a bill, we talked a little bit about what you were going to be walking into the session with back in the spring. But one of the questions that came up to me after was, well, what's the process? What's that like? So let's interlude here for a second and just tell us a little bit about the process that you've developed when you're thinking, okay, this is something I want to turn into a bill.
I approach, legislation for me the same as I have with my involvement in business and in just my professional career, is that, I try to engage everybody who's involved in the process to make it the best. So, we've got, one way of looking at passing legislation is you've got an idea and you formulate it and you go out there and you tell staff to put it in place, and then you just go out there and you just force it through. And I take a different approach. You have an idea, you go to staff and you let them vet it, let them look through it, let them give you some suggestions for me, and then you engage the stakeholders, all stakeholders, even the ones that's going to be in opposition to it. And I try to do that because they've got a different perspective. They've got a reason to oppose it. I think it makes sense to do that from just a logistical end, because they're the ones that's going to be fighting you when you're going out there trying to present your bill, either in committee or on the floor. So why not bring them along with you? And look, invariably they have an opinion too, and a position, and sometimes you can find common ground, sometimes you can't. But I think for me, the best legislation for me to pass is to engage as many stakeholders as I can, and that takes a lot of time. It really does, and a lot of effort and a commitment. But I think I had 13 instruments this session, and I had probably 7 or 8 last year, so 20 plus. I engaged in every stakeholder I can imagine except for one. And that was the resolution for the school performance course. It's something that it was what it was. So
I got you. Okay, moving on. Want to get back into it. There is one thing that I don't think that was asked of me after we talked in the spring, and I noticed that it was not on your legislative update when I was trying to kind of bone up before we talked. The hit and run bill. There were some people that were asking about it, just unable to engage the stakeholders, didn't quite get everybody on your side for this particular session.
No, I engaged all the stakeholders and had a lot of cooperation with it. In fact, I worked with the insurance commission, I worked with insurance agencies, I worked with legislators, I worked with attorneys, I worked with judges. I got input from everybody and thought we had a bill that was going to be accepted. And 5 minutes before I walked in committee, I was told, by the insurance, industry that they had a problem with it. So, you walk into a committee made up of a lot of attorneys, who deal with a lot of insurance agencies. And I walked into a buzzsaw, to be quite honest. And, not being an attorney, it's really hard to go in there and defend yourself in your position in that capacity. So, they basically tried to work with me, and they amended the bill to basically water it down to do nothing. And I had no interest in passing a bill just to pass a bill. If it didn't accomplish what I thought it needed to accomplish, I didn't support it anymore myself. So I actually pulled the bill.
Gotcha. Well, moving on to, I guess you could say maybe something a little more greener pastures. You did have a veterans bill this year. Tell us a little bit about that.
The veterans bill, that came about. I was at a Denver Springs Kiwanis meeting, and they had a presenter who come in and talked about, the need of a homeless shelter for our women veterans. And, I immediately reached out to, our Veterans Affairs, Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Joey Strickland, and asked him, asked the colonel to come talk to me. So we sat down, again, the stakeholders, we all sat down. They probably brought 6 or 7 staff. I brought a couple with me. And we talked about the issue of homeless veterans and specifically for our women. And, from their perspective at that time, they didn't think there was a facility issue, but they did see an opportunity for them to have additional staff to help identify our veterans and get them off the street. And, instead of going through the appropriations process and just trying to, make a new position for the state government, I said, okay, let's do a study. You tell me what you can do with that position, what all they're going to be, doing, how effective you think it's going to be, and just report back to us. And then we'll take it to appropriations if it's something we think is a viable. And so that's what we're doing. And I'm real happy to work with Colonel Strickland and do everything we can for our veterans.
So as we get to as we kind of pull into the station here towards the end, any there were a couple other smaller ones I'd like for you to bring up if you'd like.
Hmm.
Anything that you want to discuss before we wrap up today?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of which ones they were. Which ones we hadn't talked about.
I can tell you, checkout procedures is one.
Yeah.
It seemed like a small deal, but probably important.
I had a parent call me and express a concern about checking a kid out, and thought it was the kid was able to check out too easily, and after checking around, to see what kind of policies are in place. I think most of our school systems are allowing our individual schools to set up that practice, that the process that they follow. So I think it's worthy of having a conversation to look at best practices across the state and see if we can find some best recommendations. And we'll see what that study comes back with. And I'm hopeful that we can just have some more formalized. I believe in local autonomy. I don't want to tell a school system how they should check their kids out, but I think having that conversation to do everything we can to make it as safe a process as possible is the right thing to do.
And last, you had a lot of bills this year.
I was busy.
Yeah. And last but certainly not least, we actually have covered everything but this particular one, which was a school one, and I should have brought it up earlier. It slipped my mind as well, is the teacher training.
So look, I've seen the years of teacher training just come. Legislators like to train teachers, and the problem with that is it's not there's this unfunded mandate, and our teachers are already tasked with enough training. And a legislator has a feel good bill that they're pushing, and so let's train our teachers. So they put it on them, and then the schools put it on their teachers, and the teachers are ultimately having to do this training on their own time. I think in our parish it's up to about 12 and a half hours or so, and so I wanted a resolution to actually identify all that training that we have in place, why we're doing it, and how long it is. And I've asked, the superintendent of education in that resolution to review it and give us some recommendations. Ideally, I think we should, if we're going to dictate training, we should have a funding source to it, or we should eliminate some of the hours or reduce what's already there. So, if you just keep going, you'll have 15, 20 hours of training on teachers that they're doing on their own time, and it's an unfunded mandate. So that is a resolution that we have.
Well, and I believe it sounds like you had a good package. On one end, when you throw in checkout with vaping and things like that, it's sort of a student safety, faculty safety kind of thing. And on the other hand, you had a lot of, trying to find more ways to get teachers into schools. So it sounds like both of those were good packages that had a direction. Of course, combined with your the drainage aspects, you had a very busy session.
Yeah, I did, and I think there's one more that we didn't talk about. It was a vaping study. The vaping industry had reached out to me, and if you remember back when we were having our big runs with the methamphetamine, and they were actually doing the Sudafed, where they were actually tracking the Sudafed being purchased. The vaping industry, they're trying to reduce the kids that are exposed to underage kids. So they're actually that social purchasing that we talked about earlier. They want to be able to identify that and try to prevent that. So they want to incorporate existing technology to give us an opportunity, ATC, to give us an opportunity to track those purchases and try to formulate what can we do to prevent them from having those bulk purchases and selling them to underage kids. So that's another study that we put in place, and that came to us actually while we were in session, and I think it came to me just because of the other vaping bills that I was working on.
Sure. So a companion bill.
That's correct. That's right.
When you're talking about these studies, did anybody give you an idea about how long they take?
It varies.
Sure.
Some of them, I put 1st of January as and look, there's a lot of people, resolutions, they have their purposes, their studies have their purposes, and sometimes they're not taken, they're not credible to some people. But, when you're limited on the bills that you can do, and you want to pass legislation in the future that involves certain issues, it's a perfect, tool to be able to establish something, whether it needs to happen or not. And so I think the resolution process is very, very helpful for us. So that's why I use them like I did.
Gotcha. And so just to kind of clarify that for folks, kind of putting ammo in your pocket.
Absolutely. And, look, the results may be, the results may be we don't need to do this.
Sure.
And I don't believe in just passing legislation that means nothing. There's a lot of legislation that's passed to say, look at what I've done, look at me. And I'm not that guy. I want to pass something that means something to my district, to my parish, and to my state.
Gotcha. So, yes, we have covered all of them. You had as mentioned, you had a busy session. So, anything you'd like to say as we wrap up here this morning?
No, look, I just want to say that I'm humbled every day that I think about the opportunity to serve our parish, and I'm very appreciative of the support that I have, and I'm doing as I said I was going to do. I'm working as hard as I can. And I will continue to do what I can to better our parish.
Well, and we appreciate you. We appreciate you going up there and stumping for us, I guess you can say. And we also appreciate you taking the time this morning to stop by, kind of walk us through the bills, the things that you did, and obviously with all these studies, kind of giving us an idea of what you're intending to pursue in the future.
Right.
So, again, sir, we appreciate you taking the time. If you'd reintroduce yourself as we head on out the door.
Yeah, and thank you, McHugh, for this opportunity. It's always my pleasure to sit down and talk with you. But I'm State Representative Buddy Mincey Jr., and I represent District 71.
Which, as you mentioned earlier, is city of Denham Springs and surrounding areas, as well as the city limits of Walker.
Yeah, it's bigger than the city of Denham. It's we go south about halfway down to Port Vincent.
Sure.
Where Forage Club Road hits Port Vincent, and then we go up to I guess that's 1019 and 64. That's my northwest corner. So it's a lot more than the city limits. All the city limits of Walker and most of Denham Springs.
Gotcha. And for those of you who might be in the district, you do have a district office in Denham Springs?
I do.
Okay. And that phone number is online, and I believe there's an email as well.
That's correct.
Okay. So if you have an issue, please remember you can always go to Google and Google Mr. Buddy Mincey, District 71. It'll take you to the website. You can get in contact with his office, and he will get back with you. And there is one question that I felt needed to be asked. I've asked you a couple that have come to me from the public, and something that I've heard recently was you had floated, or at least maybe not necessarily you had floated, but there are rumors that you were considering running for Senate, the opposite Senate seat, or the Senate seat that represents your area. So, of course, J. Rogers Pope is currently in that seat. So tell what's going on there.
Yeah, so I've actually heard that myself a few times. That's a rumor that's floating around, and each time I hear it, I call Senator Pope and ask him about it, and he reassures me that at this point he still plans on running for the Senate. And look, I deal with Senator Pope, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, and he's still having fun with it. He's still enjoying what he's doing. He still has the passion for it. And as long as he is the senator and wants to be senator, he's my senator, and I'm going to support him. So there's rumors out there that's a position that I'm interested in. At the time that the Senator Pope decides that he's not going to make that, run for that office again, that'd be something I'd have to consider. But until then, as long as he wants to be the senator, he's my senator. And we've got an elected official in the parish who's going around, saying that Senator Pope's not running, and saying, and asking people for his support for that position. But that's just misinformation.
And it's interesting. I do want to bring up, you and Rogers share a sort of synergy because of your school background.
Mm-hmm.
So y'all are a great tandem to have in the House. And I suppose that is a little bit of opinion. The synergy is there because you both have an educational background. So. Okay, well, thank you for taking the time to clear that up. And just want to remind folks that we, of course, Mr. Buddy Mincey Jr., thanks for joining us. And please, folks, please remember, we are on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube. We are once a week in print on Thursdays at $7 a month to get that in your mailbox. We're also online, www.livingstonparishnews.com. We appreciate Mr. Mincey taking the time today. We appreciate you guys watching and listening, and we will see you next time.